This is a full story. Kitten wishes you all a happy and enjoyable story. I was with the New York socialite for 5 years, and just the day before we were about to get engaged, she got into a car accident and lost her memory. I took care of her meticulously, hoping she would remember the memories we shared, but I accidentally overheard her talking to her first love. Of course, the amnesia is fake. I just don't want to marry him, until I truly gave up on her and disappeared entirely from her world. She showed up at my doorstep in a wedding dress, crying, "Rocky, can you marry me one more time?" When Hailey opened her eyes, I stood up in delight. "Hailey, you're awake." The doctor said she might never wake up, so I hardly dared to sleep, afraid I'd miss any news. Finally seeing her eyes open, I felt a lump in my throat. Clumsily, I held her hand. "How do you feel? Does it hurt anywhere?" "Who are you? I don't know you." Her words cut me off abruptly, Hailey's face cold as she threw the words out. I froze, unable to believe my ears. Forcing a smile, my voice trembled. "Hailey, don't joke like that. I'm your fiancé, Rocky." Hailey's beautiful eyes filled with disbelief. She suddenly yanked her hand away, anger flaring. "Don't talk nonsense. My fiancé is Tony." Hearing this, I was stunned. Tony? The name stirred a memory. He was Hailey's ex-fiancé. Back then, Hailey and Tony's families had arranged a marriage. The two grew up together, perfectly matched. Everyone thought they'd end up together. But Tony's family suddenly went bankrupt, and Hailey's parents unilaterally called off the engagement. The marriage fell apart. Facing Hailey's cold gaze, my desperate eyes landed on the ring on her middle finger. My eyes lit up. "No, Hailey, look, we're already together." I pulled her hand gently. The ring sparkled brilliantly under the light. I stammered through an explanation, while Hailey's expression grew increasingly impatient. Clang! The ring landed harshly on the ground. Hailey glared at me coldly, speaking each word with icy precision. "I don't care who you are. Get out now. I only want Tony." The doctor said Hailey lost her memory because of the accident. This was the 5th time she had thrown me out of her hospital room. Behind the door, her angry voice echoed. "Get out. I said I don't want to see you." Her friends, standing inside the room, exchanged uneasy glances. How strange. Hailey remembered everyone except me. Her attitude toward me was even outright hostile. The door creaked open and Jack stepped out. "Rocky, don't take it personally. She has amnesia now, and a bit of a temper is normal. She just forgot about me." My eyes dimmed as I forced a smile. "I understand. As long as she takes care of herself." Jack hesitated, then whispered, "How about bringing Tony here? Rocky, don't get me wrong. The doctor said it might help stabilize her emotions and speed up her recovery." Her voice faltered, as if she knew the suggestion was insensitive. "After all, I'm Hailey's fiancé." I said nothing, my gaze drifting back to Hailey through the window. She sat there with bandages wrapped around her, eyes red-rimmed. "I just want Tony. Please bring him here." The always proud socialite now sounded utterly heartbroken. After a moment, I heard my own hoarse voice reply, "All right." I went back into the hospital room. This time, Hailey was unusually calm. She sized me up briefly before speaking softly. "Rocky, why would I ever want to marry you? Because we were in love. Because you once loved me." I opened my mouth, my fingers clenching tightly, but no words came out. At that moment, a man entered the room. When Hailey saw him, her eyes lit up. "Tony, you're here?" Tony arrived quickly. He brushed past me, his gaze gentle as he looked at Hailey. "Hailey, I heard you were hurt?" Hailey pouted, nodding pitifully. "It hurts so much, and I keep being harassed by a bad man." There was no doubt who the bad man referred to. Suppressing the bitterness in my heart, I silently stepped aside, but Tony suddenly approached me, towering over me. He looked down and said, "Didn't you hear her? Hailey doesn't want to see you. If you have any sense, leave on your own." He said it as if it were only natural. I took a deep breath. "Mr. Tony, you should know. I'm the one who's her fiancé now." Before Tony could respond, Hailey cut in. Her expression was one of contempt, her lips curling into a mocking smile. "Then let's cancel the engagement. I never acknowledged you as my fiancé anyway." The psychological strength I'd been holding on to finally collapsed at that moment. I stared at her blankly. For a fleeting moment, I wondered if she was even truly amnesiac. My body trembled as I choked out, "Hailey, please don't treat me like this." I couldn't bear her disgusted looks, her avoidance as if I were a plague. At least don't hate me so much." A near-begging plea. But Hailey simply tilted her head, her red lips parting. With clear, malicious intent, she uttered, "No, seeing you makes me sick." Tony smugly escorted me out. Inside, I could hear their flirtation, unconcerned about my presence. Leaning against the wall, I clutched my chest in a daze. The inevitable pain in my heart began to twist violently. Never had I imagined Hailey would speak of canceling our engagement. Even during our most difficult times, she never did. Back then, she had broken with her family, and I was in my darkest days. We squeezed into a tiny rental apartment, living in poverty. The once pampered socialite secretly worked a job without my knowledge, just to save up enough to buy me the watch I had long admired for my birthday. That watch wasn't expensive, but for us at the time, it was a luxury. I didn't know how she found the job, or how she saved every cent. In the freezing winter, I looked at her chapped and reddened hands, tears of distress streaming down my face. But she just smiled, her eyes curved, and said softly, "Because I really love you." Yet this same Hailey, who loved me so deeply back then, looked at me coldly today and said, "Let's cancel the engagement. Seeing you makes me sick." The day Hailey was discharged from the hospital, she didn't tell me. I found out through her social media. "This ring Tony bought is so beautiful. What do you guys think?" The accompanying picture was of her hand, with the ring on her middle finger gleaming brilliantly. Setting down my phone, I felt dazed. The scene of her throwing away the ring a few days ago was still vivid in my mind. I didn't understand why amnesia could cause such a drastic change in someone's attitude. Or had she never truly loved me? I shook my head quickly, unwilling to think further. Hailey was just suffering from memory loss. I could wait for a year, 10 years, or even a lifetime. Returning to our marital home, I was surprised to find Hailey in the living room. When she saw me, her delicate face twisted in anger. "Rockey, I never thought you'd stoop this low. Do you have no shame?" Caught off guard by her outburst, I froze. I tried to soothe her in a gentle voice. "Hailey, I don't know what you're talking about." Her brows furrowed with hostility as she hurled a pillow at me. "Don't pretend. You told my parents to make me break up with Tony, and now you're keeping me trapped here. Rockey, you're disgusting." Her accusation hit me like a brick. I quickly realized it was her parents who didn't want her to see Tony. I pressed my lips together, trying to explain. "It wasn't me. I didn't say anything." Before I could finish, she cut me off sharply. "Rockey," she glared at me coldly, enunciating every word. "Since you've chosen to play dirty, don't blame me for being ruthless." She spat out those words and stormed out. I watched her figure disappear, clenching my fists silently. That night, Hailey returned reeking of alcohol. Tony was with her, supporting her as they entered. He helped her onto the sofa, glancing at the porridge I had left out. With a mocking laugh, Tony sneered, "Hailey was right. You really are a loyal dog." He walked up to me, his gaze condescending. "By the way, Hailey and I will be using the master bedroom tonight. Kindly make yourself scarce." I stood abruptly, anger surging through me. "If you dare, Tony, I'll..." Without hesitation, I grabbed him by the collar and punched him hard. He staggered back, groaning in pain. "Rockey." The voice didn't belong to Tony. It came from Hailey, who had woken up on the sofa. Struggling to stand, she trembled with fury. Smack! A slap landed on my face, stinging sharply. I turned my head, stunned, covering my cheek in disbelief. The pain and humiliation welled up inside me. "Hailey!" I looked at her, searching for even a hint of compassion in her beautiful face. But there was none. Biting her lip, Hailey's face twisted with anger. "How dare you hit Tony? Who gave you the right? That slap was for him." I choked on my words, unable to say anything. She carefully helped Tony up, leaving me with just one cold sentence. "Rockey, I really don't want to see you. Why don't you just go die?" The two of them went upstairs. For reasons unknown, I could clearly hear their intimate sounds. I sat on the sofa, hollow and heartbroken. "Hailey, you'll regret this," I muttered to myself. In the study, I fought back tears. On the desk was a wedding dress. Hailey had once said she wanted the most unique dress in the world for our wedding. 2 months ago, I began designing it myself. I hired the best instructors, sewing each stitch with my own hands. Trembling, I ran my fingers over the initials ZY embroidered on it. Tears blurred my vision. We were so close to getting married. Once upon a time, the man Hailey defended so fiercely was me. The next morning, I prepared hangover soup in the kitchen. Hailey often got headaches after drinking, So I had found a recipe from a traditional healer and brewed the perfect remedy for her. I waited a long time, but she didn't come downstairs. I went upstairs and saw her in the study. She was standing quietly, staring at the wedding dress, her hair hiding her expression. I froze. Was she remembering something? Suppressing my excitement, I spoke softly. "Hailey, are you okay? Does your head hurt?" She looked up at me, expressionless. "What is this?" she asked. I exhaled, following her gaze to the dress. "This is the wedding dress I designed. When we were about to get engaged, you said you wanted something unique." As I explained, my voice broke. "Hailey, please remember." She said nothing, and I thought she might finally be moved. Suddenly, she picked up a utility knife and slashed the dress. Her movements were quick, brimming with malice. By the time I reacted, the dress was already in tatters. Hailey smiled, satisfaction lighting up her face. "Rocky, the ring is gone, and now the wedding dress is too." She curled her lips in a malicious grin. "So, this stupid engagement should be over too." It all happened so fast. I closed my eyes, overcome with exhaustion. Forcing a faint smile, I turned and left. "Hailey, you must be tired. Get some rest." Hailey truly hated me. It was only now I fully realized it. Outside the room, Tony leaned against the wall. My eyes landed on the scratches and kiss marks on his chest, glaringly red. They proved just how passionate their night had been. Tony gave me a pitying look. "How pathetic. Stop coveting things that don't belong to you." As if struck by a sudden thought, he pulled out his phone, a smirk spreading across his face. "Since you're already so miserable, I might as well show you." My hands trembled as I took the phone. It was filled with indecent photos and videos taken at some point. The images and videos instantly made my eyes burn with anger. Tony took back the phone, chuckling provocatively. "If you want, I can send you a copy." As he passed me, he whispered in my ear, "By the way, your wife was amazing last night." Then he shoved me aside and stepped into the study, leaving me standing there, utterly broken. The engagement ceremony went on as planned. Hailey's father came to me, pleading that I marry her. If the engagement was called off twice, her reputation would suffer. I was silent for a moment before agreeing. I didn't want any blemish on Hailey's name. What surprised me was Hailey's lack of reaction. She accepted the engagement with calm indifference. The ceremony was hastily organized. The wedding dress and ring were casually chosen. Standing at the venue, I felt a sense of detachment. It felt like a well-rehearsed ritual, not a true wedding. I found myself wondering, was this decision really the right one? Hailey and I weren't in the same room. As the guests arrived, I greeted them with a smile. She hadn't come out yet. I thought she was still preparing. Time crept by until it was time to start, but Hailey was still nowhere to be seen. Murmurs began spreading among the crowd. Her parents' expressions grew tense. I reassured them quietly, occasionally glancing at the entrance. Hailey would come. She'd never lied to me before. She wouldn't let me down. Until her makeup artist rushed in, flustered. "Something's wrong. Miss Hailey is gone." The lively venue fell into silence. The makeup artist stammered out an explanation. "I was doing Miss Hailey's makeup, and she said she needed to use the restroom, but after a long time, she didn't return. When I went to look for her, she was gone." I could feel the pitiful stares of the crowd on me. A bitter taste spread in my mouth as I forced a smile. From the moment Hailey avoided seeing me earlier, I had a bad feeling, but I refused to believe it. I couldn't accept that the Hailey who once loved me could do such a thing. I took a deep breath, bowed to the guests, and nodded to her mother. "Let's go find Hailey." I found Hailey in an alley. She was in Tony's arms, whispering sweetly. I overheard her laughing softly, her voice sultry and tender. "Tony, we can finally be together now." Tony murmured something into her ear. Hailey buried her face in his neck, giggling. "I never lost my memory," she said. "I just tricked that idiot Rocky. I didn't want to marry him anyway." A buzzing filled my head. Standing at the corner, I began to tremble. Suddenly, everything made sense. Her odd behavior, her selective memory loss. It was all fake. Every excuse I'd made for her, every doubt I'd pushed aside, they became a blade, cutting deeply into my heart. A low laugh escaped my lips. Bitterness, anger, and sorrow were replaced by something else. Calm. I closed my eyes, my nails digging into my palms. This had to end. Hailey's parents arrived and saw them too. Her mother's shocked gasp made Hailey notice me. Her gaze flickered with unease, but was quickly replaced with a scornful glare. "You saw that? Good. Saves me the trouble of explaining. Rocky, I don't want to marry you." I cut her off, speaking with measured calm. "Hailey, let's cancel the engagement." She froze. her eyes widening in surprise. It seemed she hadn't expected me to say it first. Moments later, she smirked in mockery. Playing the noble act now? Don't come crawling back later. I won't. I smiled faintly. Never again. Hailey's father sighed deeply, unable to push for the engagement any further. With the engagement canceled, I moved out of the house we'd shared. The thought of the traces Hailey and Tony left there filled me with disgust. On social media, Hailey frequently posted photos with Tony, as if flaunting her happiness. That was just her way. Shaking my head, I started unpacking my new home. As I sorted through my belongings, I came across an old photo album. It was filled with pictures we'd taken in our first apartment. I sat on the floor, staring at the album. Memories of why I fell in love with Hailey came flooding back. I grew up with my grandfather. After his unexpected passing, I was taken back to his family's home. They said I was my grandfather's illegitimate child, but I knew what that really meant. I was an unwanted bastard. In this world of scheming and interests, I was a thorn in everyone's side. When the other children learned who I was, they bullied me relentlessly. One day at a banquet, I met Hailey. She wore a princess dress, surrounded by admirers. She was untouchable, a princess in her own world. I, on the other hand, was nothing more than a stray dog. During the event, some children dragged me into a corner. They kicked me, pressed their shoes against my face. I thought to myself, dying like this wouldn't be so bad. After all, no one cared about me anymore. I closed my eyes until a soft but firm voice interrupted. "What are you doing?" The children froze. Their tormenting halted. Hailey stood before me, her gaze sharp as she addressed them. "I don't bully people, and you dare do this in front of me? Are you challenging me?" Her family's status silenced them. Frightened, they quickly scattered. I stared at her, half in fear myself. Then her fox-like eyes landed on me. She extended a hand. "Get up. Boys shouldn't cry so much." Her tone was harsh, but her palm was warm and steady. It was the first time I felt kindness from someone. Tears rolled down my cheeks uncontrollably. Hailey probably doesn't remember that day anymore, but back then, I could never have imagined we'd end up like this. A few days later, I was invited to an unavoidable banquet. Left with no choice, I brought a female companion along. The banquet hall was bustling with activity. My companion clung to my arm as we navigated through the crowd. With a polite smile, I exchanged pleasantries with the guests. Crash! The sound of glass shattering on the ground froze me in place. I looked up and saw Hailey standing there, clutching Tony's arm, staring blankly at me. A broken glass lay at her feet. My companion let out a startled gasp, but I lowered my head to gently comfort her. Suddenly, a shadow loomed over us. At some point, Hailey had stepped in front of me. Her expression was tense, her gaze fixed on my companion's hand on my arm. "Who is she?" Hailey asked. I frowned at her question, finding it absurd. "This doesn't seem to concern you, Miss Hailey." I looked at her calmly, my voice flat and indifferent. "Miss Hailey." She repeated my words, her expression puzzled. Sensing my companion's unease, I patted her shoulder reassuringly, then turned back to Hailey. "Miss Hailey, could you step back a little? You're scaring my companion." Her eyes flicked over my companion, a condescending smirk forming on her lips. "Seems your taste has really gone downhill." She adjusted the hem of her designer gown, looking every bit like a peacock in full display. I met her gaze coldly. "I'll say it again. Miss Hailey, please step back." She froze, her eyes wide in disbelief. "Rockey, how dare you talk to me like this?" My patience worn thin. I exhaled slowly and spoke clearly. "Hailey, I think you've forgotten how ugly things were when we ended. Don't appear before me again. Don't make me despise you even more." Without waiting for a response, I took my companion's hand and walked away. From the corner of my eye, I saw Hailey standing there, stunned and at a loss, while Tony appeared relieved. The banquet continued, but Hailey was nowhere to be seen for the rest of the evening. It no longer had anything to do with me. Later that night, I got an unexpected call. "Hello?" The background was noisy, and then her familiar, haughty voice came through. "Rockey, come pick me up." It was Hailey. I frowned. "If there's nothing urgent, I'm hanging up." "Rockey, don't you dare hang up on me." Her voice sounded tipsy, sticky with a drunken whine. "I'm drunk. My head hurts." I took a deep breath. "Hailey, if you're feeling unwell, go find Tony. Stop bothering me." A new, unfamiliar female voice suddenly spoke. "Sorry about this. Hey man, your friend here's had too much to drink. Sorry for disturbing you." In the background, Hailey kept yelling, "No, it's Rockey. It's Rockey." Amid the commotion, things quieted down suddenly. Then I heard Hailey's soft, trembling voice. "Rocky, do you still love me?" She was clearly drunk. The question almost made me laugh. "Feeling a little cruel," I replied. "How could I? The mere sight of you makes me sick." Silence hung on the other end, broken only by her shallow breathing. Annoyed, I hung up the phone. I later heard that Hailey and Tony hadn't been in contact for several days. It didn't surprise me. Hailey had always been like this, discarding people when she got tired of them. One day, I saw a new post from her on social media. She was smiling radiantly in the photo, captioned, "back together again." I didn't understand what she meant, but the room in the background looked familiar. Frowning, I realized it was the house I had sold through an agent. Why had Hailey bought it? Was it to commemorate her relationship with Tony? Late that night, it began to pour. A soft knock came at the door. I got up and opened it, surprised to see Hailey. She was drenched from head to toe, her petite frame trembling. My eyes fell on her clothes. I froze. She was wearing the wedding dress I had once sewn for her myself, the same one she had slashed to pieces. Now it was whole again, though the stitches were crude and clumsy, like the work of a beginner. "Rocky." Her voice was thick with tears, her ruined makeup streaking her face. The once pristine heiress looked utterly defeated. "Rocky," she called again, meeting my impassive gaze. Her eyes brimmed with tears. "I shouldn't have done what I did. Could you give me another chance? I still love you so much. Rocky, will you marry me again?" I stood in silence, her current self overlapping with the Hailey who had once smiled so brightly in our tiny apartment. But my heart was calm. Even the last traces of resentment had long since faded away. That's when I realized I truly didn't love her anymore. I sighed, retrieved a towel from the bathroom, and tossed it to her. Her eyes lit up faintly, but my voice was steady as I said, "Marry you again? After you threw me away without a second thought? Hailey, life doesn't work that way. You should know by now. I don't love you anymore." Her face turned pale, her lips moving as if to explain, but I shut the door on her. "Hailey, we should have said goodbye long ago." Hailey had been missing for a few days. Tony, however, reached out to me. His voice was slightly hoarse. "Rocky, let's talk." At the cafe, I was surprised when I saw Tony. He looked haggard, his once handsome face now shadowed with exhaustion. The arrogance he once carried was nowhere to be seen. When he saw me, he clenched his jaw. "What kind of spell did you cast on Hailey? Why did she break up with me?" I lowered my gaze, speaking calmly. "That's something you should ask Hailey. And while you're at it, tell her to stop bothering me." Tony trembled with anger, but his eyes suddenly shifted to something behind me. "Hailey." I turned around. Hailey stood there, her eyes red and swollen. When she saw me looking at her, she pressed her lips together. Her normally vibrant voice was now dull. "Rocky, did he bully you?" I remained indifferent, shaking my head. Hailey began stammering. "If he bullied you, you can tell me." I cut her off. "No need. What I want is for neither of you to appear in front of me again." Hailey's body trembled, a trace of pain flashing through her eyes. I stood and left. Behind me, her choked voice echoed, "No matter what I do from now on, will you not care anymore?" I paused briefly, but without turning back, I walked away. My silence was its own answer, because when something is broken, it remains broken. A love that comes too late is worth less than nothing. Almost every day, I received lengthy messages from Hailey, some long, some short, filled with her regrets and declarations of love. I grew tired of it and blocked every account she used. After a period of quiet, news about Hailey reached me again. I hadn't expected her to go this far. By the time I found out, she had severed ties with her family. This wasn't just a tantrum or a dramatic falling out. It was a complete break. She had renounced her status as a New York heiress, abandoning her life of luxury and privilege. I thought of the last message she had sent me. "If we could start over, would you forgive me?" I didn't understand what she was trying to achieve. After work one day, I saw her standing at the entrance of my company. When she noticed me, she straightened up nervously. She wasn't wearing designer clothes anymore, just a simple white dress, the kind Hailey would never have glanced at before. I glanced at her briefly, frowning. "What do you want?" She lowered her head, offering me a lunchbox. Have you eaten? I made this for you." I finally understood what she was trying to do. The once pampered heiress, who never lifted a finger for anything, was now cooking for me. How ridiculous. Her eagerness was plain on her face, her eyes sparkling with expectation. I paused, then took the lunchbox from her hands. The next moment, I threw the bag and the lunchbox straight into the trash. "I won't eat it. Don't come here again." Instead of going home, I went to a nearby restaurant. One of my friends, after hearing about my broken engagement, had insisted on setting me up with someone. I couldn't refuse, so I agreed. When I arrived, the woman was already there. Her name was Serena. She was petite and cute, with round almond-shaped eyes that curved like crescent moons when she smiled. "Rocky, you're Rocky, right?" Her voice was just as sweet. I nodded with a smile. She spoke in a lively and playful way, making our dinner surprisingly pleasant. By the end of the evening, my mood had lifted significantly. When we parted, Serena handed me a note with a grin. Asterisk, if I'm your dream girl, make sure to light up for me. Asterisk, I couldn't help but laugh, slipping the note into my pocket. When I walked out of the restaurant, I immediately saw Hailey standing nearby. She had already seen Serena leaving moments ago. Hearing my footsteps, she lifted her head, her face still streaked with dried tears. I sighed and reminded her, "It's late. You should go home." Hailey didn't respond, as if she hadn't heard me. Instead, she asked blankly, "Are you going to get engaged to her?" I frowned, wanting to say it wasn't happening so soon. But after a moment, I replied, "Yeah, if nothing unexpected happens." Hailey's lips trembled. "And what about me? You can go back to Tony. Apologize to your family." Tears welled up in her eyes again, and she cried miserably. "But I only love you. I only want you." I stared at the disheveled Hailey, and suddenly, I laughed. "Do you realize how disgusting you sound? Let me make this clear. Even if I were to marry a dog, I wouldn't marry you, Hailey." It was as if all her hope had been shattered. Her gaze dimmed completely. Not wanting to see her any longer, I immediately turned and walked away. After that, I never saw Hailey again. The next time I heard about her, it was on the news. The anchor's voice was especially gentle. "The long-missing heiress Hailey was found dead in her home this morning, having taken her own life." By then, I was holding my newlywed wife in my arms, living a completely different life. Hailey's perspective. Rocky liked me. I had always known that. From the way he looked at me, from his clumsy gestures, it was painfully obvious. I'd caught him sneaking glances at me more than once. It was written all over his face. Although I never understood why he liked me, I didn't dislike him. In fact, I enjoyed the way he tried to please me. After all, while he wasn't from a wealthy family, he was undeniably handsome. As a woman, it was satisfying to be adored by a high-quality man like him. I had many suitors. Almost all of them came dressed in suits, holding bouquets of roses. Cliché, boring. But Rocky? He was different. He clutched his love letter so tightly that his sweaty palms nearly ruined it. I found it funny. On a whim, I said yes. The day I agreed to date him, he cried and laughed at the same time. He even spun me around several times in his arms. He said he would never let me regret choosing him. Of course, I've never regretted anything in my life. Rocky treated me so well, better than anyone ever had, not even my parents. Actually, maybe not even my parents. He often worked part-time jobs, saving up every penny to buy me gifts. I told him I didn't need them. My money could buy 10 times as much. But Rocky would just say, "As your boyfriend, this is my duty." He'd cry as he spoke, feeling like he wasn't good enough for me. What a fool. I thought there could be no better boyfriend than him, even though I didn't love him. After college, he told me he wanted to start a business, earn lots of money for me to spend. I thought he was silly, but I was bored, so I stuck around for the ride. It's not like I loved him. I even cut ties with my parents, moving into a cramped apartment with him. Rocky was impressive. He truly deserved respect. During the hardest times, he spent every penny he earned on me, never buying anything for himself. Such a fool. I couldn't stand seeing him so pitiful, so I swallowed my pride and got a job. But the result? My hands, which I had taken such care of, were red and swollen from the cold. I was angry, but when I saw Rocky's teary, grateful expression, it didn't feel like such a loss. Then I met Tony. He cried, begging me not to leave him, saying he truly loved me. Of course, Tony and I were meant to be together. We were only separated because of family reasons. I loved Tony. From that day on, Tony and I stayed in contact behind Rocky's back until one day, on my way to meet Tony, I got into a car accident. It hurt so much. When I woke up, the first thing I saw was Rocky's worried face. I didn't want to stay with him anymore, but I couldn't bring myself to say it. So I came up with an idea. I pretended to have amnesia. There's a medical term for it, selective amnesia. I acted as if I remembered everyone, except him. Rocky looked devastated. I felt guilty, but I had no choice. I wanted to be with Tony. Tony didn't visit me often, but Rockey was there every day. He cooked for me, made me laugh, and even stayed up at night to keep an eye on me. The more he did, the guiltier I felt, so I started snapping at him, hoping he'd stay away. But Rockey never left. On the day of my engagement party, Tony gave me an idea: pretend to go along with the engagement, then run away at the last moment. He'd find me, and Rockey would realize I wasn't really amnesiac. That way, Rockey would finally leave me alone. For some reason, Tony's plan made my heart ache. Still, I agreed. I didn't want to hurt Rockey too much. This seemed like the best solution. It worked. Rockey no longer pursued me. He even said himself that he wanted to call off the engagement. But when the moment finally came, I felt more panic than relief. I began to question whether I had made the right choice. The pain hit me hardest when Rockey showed up to the party with another woman on his arm. I knew I had no right to feel this way, but I couldn't stop myself from questioning him. He said he hated me. As I watched him walk away, I felt lost. The pain was overwhelming, far worse than my breakup with Tony. It was only then that I realized I might have fallen in love with Rockey. Finally understanding my feelings brought me a strange sense of peace. I had loved Rockey all along. I just hadn't realized it. I thought, since Rockey once loved me so deeply, he would forgive me. We could go back to how things were, but we didn't. Even though I spent sleepless nights sewing the wedding dress he designed, even though I gave up my life as an heiress, ready to start over with him, he never looked back. He called me disgusting. He said he'd rather marry a dog than me. I didn't understand. How could the Rockey who once loved me so much turn into this? It felt unreal. Until I saw him with another woman, his face full of tenderness. That's when it hit me. Rockey truly didn't want me anymore. It was me. I was the one who had driven him away. The end. If you like Kitten's story, please follow and like it. Updated every morning at 9 a.m.